a Nordic beast here, and welcome back to Sprocket. Today is a good day. My stepson is at a friend's house, my daughter is sleeping, my wife is at work. I have the house nice and quiet to myself, and I actually get to record in the daylight. Something you don't get to do with children. Usually you're recording at the middle of the night when everybody's asleep, and it's quiet. Now today I want to do a showcase of vehicles I've made the last couple of days. I have a tendency to ramble on, so I'm going to try and keep my ramblings to a minimum because nobody wants to hear me talk for half an hour. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I made the BT tank. Now, it was closer to the BT5 when I first made it in weight, and the updates that the dev has made in the last couple of days, which have made the game way better, has made it shed like a ton and a half of weight off of there. I did not put the proper armor values. I just put 13 millimeter all around because I remember it was thin and I couldn't remember what's what, so it's all 13 millimeter. So I'm sure if I put proper armor values in there, I might be able to get the weight up a bit. But overall, it looks about as close as I'm going to get it with the limitations of the game currently. We're nice and fast. We have a 45 millimeter rapid fire cannon, about 77 millimeters a pen. And the only thing is that the front hull does not come to an arrowhead like the actual tank. But this thing is just a speedy little bastard. And I got the machine gun on the back. I couldn't remember if it's on the rear of the turret or if it's on like the side. You know, the Russians always do weird things with their machine gun turrets, like the KVs and all those all have like weird anti-infantry machine guns poking through the armor. But overall, I feel it looks the part, and it's pretty damn close. I was very happy when this was finished. So when I was done with this, I went to go do the interwar scenario. I can't remember which one it is exactly, but it's interwar vehicles. And I started designing a tank, and I thought, well, I just did an interwar tank. Why don't I do something similar? And it got me on the process of, what if the United States continued developing the Christie tanks? And I came up with this guy. Now, a little bit of story time with Nordic here, which I will try to sum up quickly. I don't know if you guys know J. Walter Christie, but he was an asshole. He was an eccentric, self-obsessed, perfectionist asshole. And he would work on his vehicles till he felt they were ready, and at the expense of whoever was paying for it. Much like Howard Hughes. However, Howard Hughes' products came out, they were incredible. Yes, the Hercules, or as it's more commonly known nowadays as the Spruce Goose, quote-unquote, which he was not pleased about that nickname. When the Hercules finally flew, it was fucking incredible. It was unbelievable. It was this thing. It was this event in time that people remember. Nobody remembers the Christie tank except for tank nerds like myself. Now, Christie wanted fast tanks. He wanted hot rods of tanks, basically. And he kept just changing them, which made the armor thinner. He didn't care about the armament. Like, you realize these things are going into combat. You can't just race across the battlefield and be like, oh shit, what am I going to do? Nothing. So he ended up selling the technology to Russia and to Britain, which they ended up using. All the British fast tanks use Christie suspension. The T-34 used it. But you notice, after those, they all went to torsion bar. In fact, the T-34, before the war started, they developed a model of the T-34 to use a torsion bar suspension that looks very similar to Panzer IIIs and IVs. So the reason they didn't, and it had return rollers too, the smaller wheels for the torsion bar and return rollers. Now the reason they didn't was because World War II started and they didn't want to retool all their machinery. They wanted to be able to pump out as many tanks as possible, even if it was with the Christie suspension. Now the positives of the Christie suspension was that it was fast and it had a smooth ride. You could drive like a bat out of hell, and again, you didn't really feel much because you had these springs. A bar went through the tank, and it also took up a lot of room. A bar went through the tank, and it was all springs that would bounce the bar, and nice, smooth suspension, real fast. And he would have the rear sprocket attached to the first wheel, so you could actually drive without your tracks. So your advantage is fast, smooth ride, you could drive without tracks even faster on roads, but nobody ever did that. The disadvantage was they were expensive, complicated, and took up a lot of room in the tank. So eventually it went to the wayside. But if you look at technology for the late 30s, early 40s, and how tanks were looking, I feel this is pretty close to what an American Christie would look like. This is supposed to be a rounded, welded hull. It's as close as I could get. Same thing with the turret, rounded and welded, like the early, the M3 Lee or Grant. I would prefer to call it the Grant. Or the early M4 Shermans, the M4A1s that had the actual rounded cast hull. So that's what this is supposed to be. And it's 38 millimeter up front. See here? Nice. 38 millimeter. And then the sides are 26. And the rear is 20. Oh, no, it's actually 26. It should be 20. This is pretty heavily armored for an interwar tank. And it is angled, which a lot of American tanks did actually angle their front chassis, their front upper plate. I used none of the stats from the BT. This was a complete original build for that scenario, but it's still just as quick and maneuverable. I'd say it's a little slower, but just as maneuverable. And we got a 37 millimeter rapid fire. Now this one, a little less pen, about 73 millimeter, but this thing is quick and nimble, and I think it looks the part. It looks like an American Christie, Now, America did have 3 Christie tanks from the early 1930s, early mid-30s. There was Hurricane, Tornado, and I don't remember what the third one was called. Put a gun to my head, I couldn't tell you what it was called. And that was it. That was the extent. And they were pretty much like hand-built vehicles that were expensive and took forever to get because J. Walter Christie was an asshole. So that's story time with Nordic and the American Christie. Now the next one I am very, very proud of. I stayed up way too late last night building this bad boy. This is my Wiseman Mark II. First off, my friend Wiseman, who I game with, I've gamed with him for about 7 years now. He loves British tanks, and he also got the game. He got Sprocket, and we were talking to one another yesterday, and I was working on my Wiseman Mark I, and he was having trouble building a British-style tank that he wanted, and it was frustrating him. And I was building the Wiseman Mark I that was essentially what eventually evolved into this, and I couldn't get it to work, and it was driving me nuts. So finally, I scrapped the Mark I, and I started over with the Mark II, and now it has similarities. Mostly just the tread system and the front plate. But this is a casemate tank destroyer that's a mix of just about every goddamn British vehicle I can think of. So it has the track system, or at least the track layout, of a Churchill. It doesn't have the little tiny bogies, but I went with the bigger ones instead, like what you would see on a Centurion later. But mostly for practicality reasons, this thing handles way better now. I'll get into that in a minute. But the nice long tracks and the big wide tracks, too. The front plate is from a Cromwell. The side skirting is from a Matilda. Now, the casemate turret is a mix between the Cromwell and the F.4 202 prototype tank. And that's also from the F.4 202. That's why I put the stowage on the side. They do that for a lot of their tanks, and I really like it. And then lastly, I added the machine gun turret on top because of the Tortoise, which the Tortoise is one of Wiseman's favorite tanks to play, like when we play War Thunder. He loves that thing. And this is the most British thing I think I've ever seen. I have a 94 millimeter gun on it, and it has 152 millimeter plates on the front, like the later Churchills and the Black Prince, which was an upgraded Churchill. So last night, the reason I stayed up so long was not for the look of this thing. The look was not hard to achieve. Once I had the idea, it wasn't hard to do it. The issue I was having with this slow, chunky, murderous machine was whenever I would deal with like hills and slopes and stuff, like, all right, right here on the right, you see there's a bit of a hill. As I crest over, what would happen is I would start going over like this, and it would go real tight, and I couldn't do anything. And then all of a sudden, it would go back to the right, and I'd never press anything but W. It would just do it on its own. So what was happening was originally I had this suspension. And then I had it extended down, because you can go to suspension and you have your rest angle. Well, it was at negative like 30-something degrees or whatever. So I think it was too extended. It wasn't absorbing any shock. And it was just catching on everything. And it was wobbling back and forth no matter what kind of hills were there. I tried to use it in the fields scenario where you're up against like panthers and stuff like that. And I couldn't aim and I couldn't angle my tank. And it was getting frustrating as shit. Well, when I switched suspension, all of it was fixed. All of it. So this thing's got a long reload, but a very powerful, powerful gun. This 94 millimeter is just a goddamn monster. And it maneuvers well. It's not fast. It accelerates all right. But the maneuverability is what you want out of a casemate tank destroyer. So, stop. There we go. So as you see, it turns relatively well for its size. I mean, it's about 40 tons. It's just under 40 tons. And it is actually about the size of the hull of my assault tank that I featured yesterday. So this thing is wonderful. Like I said, I feel it is the most British thing I've ever seen. You just put a tea maker in this thing and the Brits would start building it immediately. So I sent it to Wiseman, but he is not available today, so I haven't heard back on his opinion. I really hope he likes it. I really do. All right, next up, this is an armored personnel carrier I made. Well, it's actually a scout. It is supposed to be a cavalry scout. But as you notice, it looks a lot like an M113, and that is exactly what I was going for. I wanted something that was an M13 that wasn't an M113, if you catch my drift. And the M113s have often been pressed into roles they were not designed for. I mean, they were an armored taxi, and they did their role great. I mean, they're still in service around the world. So I just basically just kind of made it much smaller and modified the front end and added this little turret with a 30mm cannon. And the 30mm is actually really good. It has almost 100mm of penetration. It's like 98mm. It's a solid reload, about like 3.5 seconds. And this little thing, like, look at how stable the gun is. I mean, because it's a tiny gun and the tank isn't the fastest, I mean, it's decent. It'll get the job done. Overall, the vehicle is actually quite small. Can I? Oh, look at that! Right over the trench. The vehicle is small. And it's funny. My stepson saw this. He's like, "Wow, that thing's really tall." Like compared to its length, yes, but it is still a relatively inconspicuous vehicle. And so, since it's supposed to be a scout, I added the fuel tanks, a little radio antenna, which it's supposed to have anyway. In fact, the game bitches when you don't. And that's it. It's kind of a modern Bradley when the Bradley is used as a Cav scout. It has a small squad in the back for scouting, as well. It's not meant for fighting infantry. It's not meant for carrying infantry. It's literally a scout itself with scout infantry in the vehicle. So that's what this is. And it looks the part as far as I'm concerned. Very 1950s, more than World War II, honestly. And let's see. Last serious entry is this guy. I actually made this before I made the Wiseman Mark II. And I made this thing so fast. I can't believe it actually worked exactly how I intended. So I wanted a kind of how the Panther was designed from the T-34, the experiences they had from the T-34. I wanted a German tank destroyer that was developed from their experiences fighting the Russians. And what's funny is it really ended up kind of like how actual German tank destroyers ended up. So let's call it Convergent Evolution. The only Russian-looking thing about it is the mantlet, the big-ass log, and the fuel tanks. But overall, this is supposed to be earlier in the conflict as opposed to the later big gun ones. This is a 50mm cannon, which means you have a nice quick reload compared to like a 75, so 4 seconds and change, which is pretty darn good. And you also have 120mm of penetration out of it, which is pretty damn good because you have this big long barrel and sizable rounds. So it's nimble, It's not the fastest tank, but it's pretty quick. It's about 30 tons and has decent armor on it. Definitely enough to combat what it would be going after. All right, stop doing that. Why are you... I wasn't doing that before. I was pressing the A key or the left key, and it was trying to turn right. So, I don't know why it was doing that. Can we cross this trench? Yeah, there we go. Without issue. So, nice and speedy. Decent turn rate, which again, important for a casemate tank destroyer. And its armor. We have 75 millimeter, 85 millimeter, 35 millimeter, but high effectiveness because it's angled, and 75 millimeter here. And it's not showing anything for the mantlet. Maybe I didn't put anything for the mantlet. But 45, 45, and 30 mil on the back. And so at 31 tons and that kind of armor, not a bad vehicle. It's speedy. It has a good rapid-fire gun for the time period it's supposed to be, which, looking at 42, 43, and nice and angled. But, of course, you would see this later on with the Jagd Panther and the Panzer 470s and such. And so it definitely has the look and feel that I was going for, as well as the German camouflage. I was going to put iron crosses on it, but a lot of detail is taken up on this thing, so I didn't know where I could put it where it'd feel natural. All right, last thing I want to cover, and this thing is so not serious, is this monstrosity. So I was trying to make the Bane Blade, and first off, you can't even come close to the dimensions of the Bane Blade. This is maybe a 2/3 scale model, and you can't make the sponsons or the multi-deck situation that's usually on the vehicle. It is just oof. And so this ugly ass thing is me taking it as far as I could go, and yeah, that's it. So usually, like I said, it's got sponsons here with turrets on the side and turrets on top of it. It's got a turret here. It's got a battle cannon here, like the short snub barrel howitzer. And then this big gun, it's supposed to have like a coaxial like auto cannon and a turret on top. You know, the thing's just huge, and the hull is multi-layered that you can't do yet. So maybe in the future. And this thing is just a monster. It's 100 and like it was 151 tons, and then with all those updates, look at this. I'm stopping. Oh, it's ridiculous. So it moves. That's something. Look at that. Can't even aim the gun. It's too big. Now this got me to think that one of my next builds, I want to make an American mouse. There's not really much reason for it, but Germany's already got a mouse. The US had the T-28 T-95 series, but that wasn't turreted. That was, an assault gun meant for taking out fortifications and shit like that. So I want an American mouse. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I haven't really thought about it. And there's already plenty of people out there making the mouse. So I'm going to make an American mouse. I like American tanks. I am American. So I'm going to do that. And if you guys have any idea for builds you would like to see in the future, please let me know in the comments down below. I read your comments, and in fact, yesterday I read a comment that I really liked. And it said, imagine designing an entire tech tree for yourself through this game. And I'm like, that is a great idea. My only issue is they don't have wheels yet. They don't have working machine guns or auto cannons yet. And yes, I can do something like that sort of in the game, but none of it would function. So I plan on doing that in the future when the game is more functional to do that. I don't want to just speculate. I want to be able to, this is how it works in the constraints of the game. So, well, if you guys enjoyed the episode, please hit that like button, and I'll see you guys next time.